In the quiet, tree-lined suburb of Little Ferry, New Jersey, Sand Hill Court is the kind of place where the loudest sound is usually the wind through the trees or a neighbor's car pulling into a gravel driveway. It is a pocket of suburban charm just a stone's throw from the relentless energy of New York City, a place where families come to find safety and stability. But on March 22, 2022, that silence wasn't just broken, it was shattered. At 4 p.m., a teenage boy opened his front door to find police officers standing on his porch, their shadows stretching long across the pavement. His words were few, whispered through the haze of shock, but they would haunt the community of Bergen County forever. She's inside. She's shot. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. To understand the tragedy of the Dominguez sisters, you have to first understand the light that Omelly Dominguez carried into every room she entered. At 21 years old, Omelly was the embodiment of the American dream, a young woman whose life was a series of carefully calculated steps toward greatness. Born in Union City, she was raised in a household where education was not just encouraged, it was a sacred pillar of their existence. To her family, she was affectionately known as the Scholar, a title she earned through years of disciplined late-night study sessions and an unshakable focus on her future. Omelly was a force of nature at William Patterson University. She wasn't just a student, she was a leader. With a staggering 3.9 GPA, she was a member of the Mu Sigma Upsilon sorority, an organization that prides itself on empowerment and diversity. She was just months away from receiving her degree in nursing, a calling she chose out of a deep-seated desire to heal and protect. Her friends remember her as the person who kept a meticulous planner, whose dorm room was always immaculate, and whose heart was open to anyone who needed a kind word. She worked as an admissions assistant at the university, guiding new students through the very halls she had mastered. For Omelly, the path was clear. She was going to be the anchor of her family, the professional who would ensure they were all taken care of. But while Omelly was building a life of structure and service in New Jersey, a shadow was lengthening 900 miles away in Jacksonville, Florida. Her older sister, 27-year-old Angeli, was living a life that was rapidly fracturing into a million pieces. Angeli was 5 months pregnant, a milestone that should have been a time of celebration and nesting. Instead, it had become the catalyst for a terrifying descent into a psychological abyss. Angeli had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, a heavy burden for anyone to carry, but the circumstances of her pregnancy had made it unbearable. Fearing the effects of her prescribed medication on her unborn child, she had reportedly stopped taking her treatments. Without that chemical anchor, her mind began to drift into dangerous waters. The party girl energy she was known for on social media, the EDM concerts, the dancing, the vibrant tree-hugging videos she posted to YouTube, had curdled into something unrecognizable. The contrast between the two sisters in the spring of 2022 was stark and heartbreaking. While Omelly spent her nights studying medical charts and preparing for clinical rotations, Angeli was navigating a world of disorganized thoughts, incoherent speech, and a mounting sense of persecution. Her fiancé, Tony Miranda, was the primary witness to this slow-motion collapse. He watched as the woman he loved began to slip away, replaced by a version of Angeli that was prone to verbal and sometimes physical aggression. She was losing her grip on reality, and by extension, she was losing her grip on her life in Florida. The tension reached a critical mass on Friday, March 18, 2022. Tony, fearing for Angeli's safety and the safety of those around her, did what he thought was the right thing. He called the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. He pleaded with them to intervene, explaining her diagnosis and her recent volatile behavior. This led to Angeli being transported to a local hospital under Florida's Baker Act. The law is designed for exactly this scenario. It allows for an involuntary 72-hour hold for mental health evaluation if an individual is deemed a danger to themselves or others. It was supposed to be the reset that saved her. However, the medical system is often as fractured as the minds it tries to treat. After a brief evaluation, a doctor deemed Angeli stable enough to be discharged the very next day, Saturday. She was released back into the world not healed, but deeply resentful. She felt betrayed by Tony's intervention her paranoia now focused squarely on the man who had tried to get her help. The anger simmered in the Jacksonville heat for 48 hours. On the morning of Monday, March 21st, the situation moved from a mental health crisis to a criminal one. Tony Miranda woke up to a silent house. The driveway was empty. His white Ford Mustang was gone. But more importantly, his peace of mind was gone with it. Tony knew his fiancée was in a state of psychosis, and he knew something the police didn't yet realize. In the trunk of that Mustang were 5 of his legally owned firearms. Tony didn't hesitate. He pulled up the GPS tracking on his phone, watching the small blue that represented Angeli's location. It wasn't wandering aimlessly through the streets of Jacksonville. It was moving with a singular, chilling purpose. The dot was on Interstate 95, the great artery of the East Coast, and it was heading north. He watched in real time as she crossed the border into Georgia, then into South Carolina. She was a woman in the middle of a mental health crisis, driving a powerful vehicle, armed with a cache of weapons, and heading straight for the sister who had everything she felt she was losing. Tony picked up the phone to call the authorities again, hoping that this time they would listen before the blue reached its destination. As the white Mustang hit the highway, Angeli wasn't just driving away from her life in Florida. She was driving toward a confrontation that had been brewing in the recesses of her mind. Tony provided the police with her exact location, her speed, and a warning about the guns in the trunk. He expected a fleet of squad cars to intercept her at the next state line. But as the sun began to set over the Atlantic coast, the blue dot continued to move north, unbothered and uninterrupted, as the system prepared to make a mistake that would cost a young woman her life. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The drive from Jacksonville, Florida, to Little Ferry, New Jersey, covers roughly 934 miles. To most, it is a monotonous trek of asphalt, pine trees, and rest stops. But for the Dominguez family and the law enforcement agencies involved, those miles would become a 14-hour fuse burning toward a catastrophic explosion. As Omelly Dominguez pressed her foot onto the accelerator of the white Ford Mustang, she wasn't just navigating a highway. She was navigating a psychological landscape that was rapidly deteriorating. And as she moved through the darkness of the eastern seaboard, the safety net designed to protect citizens like Omelly was unraveling at every turn. The first and most critical failure occurred at the very start of the journey in Jacksonville. Tony Miranda, Angeli's fiancé, was in a state of sheer panic. He knew the volatile state she was in. He had witnessed the disorganized speech, the paranoia, and the recent aggression that had led to her Baker Act detention. When he realized she had taken his car and his firearms, he did exactly what society tells us to do. He called for help. He met with officers at a motel on Jacksonville's west side, pleading with them to understand the gravity of the situation. The dashcam footage from that encounter is a haunting document of systemic apathy. Tony is heard clearly stating that his mentally unstable, pregnant fiancée had stolen his vehicle and was heading toward New Jersey with guns in the trunk. He even offered his phone, showing the real-time T-Mobile GPS tracker. At that moment, Angeli was in South Carolina. She was within reach of the law. However, the responding officer viewed the situation through a narrow lens of property law rather than public safety. Because Tony and Angeli were in a domestic relationship, the officer informed him that the car wasn't technically stolen. Legally, I can't write it up as being stolen, the officer said. To the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, this was a civil matter. The presence of 5 firearms in the hands of a woman who had been involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation just 72 hours prior was seemingly not enough to trigger an emergency criminal response. No multi-state alert was issued. No BOLO went out to the Georgia or South Carolina Highway Patrol. The white Mustang was allowed to hum along I-95, crossing state lines with a cargo of lethal potential, while the authorities in Florida essentially shrugged their shoulders. As Angeli pushed into North Carolina and then Virginia, the drive became a test of endurance. For a woman experiencing paranoid schizophrenia, a 14-hour solo drive is an incubator for psychosis. The isolation of the road, the repetitive flicker of highway lights, and the lack of sleep can amplify delusions. We don't know what was going through Anjali's mind as she bypassed the skyline of Richmond or the outskirts of Washington, D.C., but we do know that her destination was fixed. She wasn't fleeing. She was hunting for a solution to the inner demons that her family struggled to comprehend. The failure in Florida was only the first domino. As Anjali neared the New Jersey border, the ticking clock moved into a higher gear. Tony's sister, Gretchen, who lived in Bayonne, New Jersey, was receiving frantic updates from Tony. She knew Anjali was close. She knew the history of the party girl lifestyle that had shifted into something dark and dangerous. Gretchen didn't wait for the Mustang to arrive. She took proactive action. She walked into the Bayonne Police Department, looking officers in the eye and telling them that a mentally unstable, armed relative was currently on the New Jersey Turnpike, heading their way. What happened next is perhaps the most frustrating part of this tragedy. The Bayonne police, echoing their counterparts in Jacksonville, treated Gretchen's warning as a domestic dispute that hadn't yet crossed into a crime. Despite being told that Anjali was off her rocker and armed, they informed Gretchen that their hands were tied. There was no protocol to intercept a vehicle based on a family member's warning of a mental health crisis, even when firearms were involved. They told her to call back if something actually happened. The system was waiting for a victim before it would agree to act. While the police department stood on ceremony and policy, Anjali was crossing the Raritan Bridge. She was moving through the dense traffic of the Garden State Parkway and the Turnpike, a ghost in a white Mustang. She was 5 months pregnant, likely exhausted, and fueled by a perceived sense of injustice. She felt the world was closing in on her. The eviction in Florida, the failed hospitalization, the anger at her fiancé. In her fractured logic, her family in Little Ferry was the only place left to turn. But she wasn't coming for comfort. She was coming for a confrontation. In Little Ferry, the sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky on that Tuesday afternoon. It was a typical spring day on Sand Hill Court. Omelly was likely focused on her meticulous planner, perhaps checking off tasks for her upcoming nursing clinicals or coordinating with her sorority sisters. She was the scholar, the one who had everything figured out. She had no way of knowing that while she was preparing to save lives, her own sister was pulling off the highway just a few miles away, reaching into the trunk for a weapon. The systemic failures had now formed a perfect circle. Florida had passed the buck to the highway had passed the buck to New Jersey, and New Jersey had passed the buck to a family that was completely unaware they were in danger. The white Mustang turned onto the quiet, residential streets of Little Ferry. The neighbors didn't look twice. It was just another car in a safe neighborhood. But as Anjali pulled up to the house on Sand Hill Court, the 1,000-mile fuse had finally reached its end. The confrontation that followed was not the huge battle the media might have expected. It was a brief, sharp collision of two very different lives. Anjali walked into the home unannounced, her presence a shock to the system. Her mother was at work, leaving only the younger brother and Omelly in the house. The younger brother, hearing the tension, stayed in his room, listening to the muffled sounds of a sisterhood that was being torn apart in real time. Anjali's demand was simple: money. She wanted a hotel room. She wanted a way to stay in New Jersey, away from the life she had just fled in Florida. But Omelly, the organized, disciplined nursing student, knew that giving in to Anjali's demands wouldn't solve the underlying crisis. She had likely seen this cycle before. The nomadic addresses, the instability, the party girl lifestyle that always ended in a plea for help. Omelly's refusal wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of boundary setting. "I've given you enough," Omelly reportedly said. It was a statement of fact, but to a mind warped by paranoid schizophrenia, it was a declaration of war. As those words hung in the air, the room went silent. The younger brother, sitting just a few yards away, heard the sound of footsteps. He didn't hear a scream or a struggle. He heard the sound of a metal slide racking, a mechanical click that signaled the end of a 14-hour journey and the beginning of a lifetime of grief. He waited for the next sound, his heart hammering against his ribs, not realizing that the bright future of the scholar was about to be extinguished in a single, heart-stopping second. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The sound of a gunshot inside a quiet suburban home is a sound that defies the senses. It is not the booming, cinematic explosion we expect from fiction. It is a sharp, percussive crack that alters the very air pressure in a room. At approximately 4 p.m. on March 22, 2022, that sound rang out inside the home on Sand Hill Court, followed by a silence so heavy it felt suffocating. Omelly's 16-year-old brother, who had arrived home from school just 20 minutes earlier, was in his bedroom when the world as he knew it collapsed. He had already sensed the tension. He had overheard the rising voices, the demands for money, and his sister Omelly's firm refusal to continue being the financial safety net for a sister who was spiraling. But when that mechanical crack echoed through the hallway, the argument ended instantly. Instinct took over. The teenager rushed into the living room, perhaps hoping it was something else. A fallen piece of furniture, a cruel prank. But the scene he encountered was one of pure, senseless devastation. Omelly, the scholar, the nursing student who was supposed to spend her life saving others, was slumped over on the couch. She had been shot in the head behind her left ear at point-blank range. The trauma was immediate and fatal. But the most haunting part of the scene wasn't just the sight of his sister. It was the presence of the shooter. Omelly Dominguez was still standing there. She didn't look like a woman in the throes of regret. She didn't drop the gun in horror. According to the criminal complaint, she simply stood over her sister's body and stared at her brother. It was a look that would later be described in court documents as surreal. A brief, chilling moment of eye contact between a brother who had just lost everything and a sister who had seemingly lost her mind. The boy managed to find his voice, crying out, "What did you do?" But Omelly offered no answer. There were no words left in her disorganized world. She turned away from the couch, weapon still in hand, and walked out the front door into the bright afternoon sun of New Jersey. While the boy scrambled for his phone to call 911, Omelly was already back in the white Ford Mustang. She pulled away from the curb of Sand Hill Court, her movements captured by a neighbor's Ring camera and a dash cam from a contractor's truck working nearby. The footage is hauntingly mundane. A white sports car with Florida plates calmly navigating a residential street. To anyone watching, it looked like someone leaving a visit. In reality, it was a fugitive fleeing a murder scene with a trunk full of firearms. The first responding officers arrived within minutes. The 911 call had initially been dispatched as a stabbing, a common confusion in the frantic early moments of domestic violence reports, but the reality was much more grim. When the Little Ferry police entered the home, they found the 16-year-old boy in a state of shock. His words were the first official record of the tragedy. "She's inside. She's shot." Inside, they found Omelly. There was nothing they could do. The Bergen County Prosecutor's Office Major Crimes Unit was called in, and the quiet suburban block was transformed into a landscape of yellow tape, forensic vans, and flashing blue lights. As the forensic teams began their grim work, the focus shifted to the white Mustang. The slow-motion tragedy that had begun 900 miles away was now a high-stakes manhunt. Because Tony Miranda, back in Jacksonville, was still monitoring the phone's GPS, the authorities finally had the urgency they had lacked for the past 24 hours. A "Be on the lookout, Bolo" alert was blasted across every police radio in the state. Omelly was not driving aimlessly. For reasons known only to her, she had turned back toward the highway, heading south on the New Jersey Turnpike. Perhaps she was trying to go back to Florida, or perhaps she was simply running until the gas ran out. For nearly 2 hours, she drove through the heart of the state, passing exits for the Meadowlands and Newark. She was a woman 5 months pregnant, likely in a state of deep psychological shock, navigating some of the busiest traffic in America. The pursuit reached its climax nearly 90 miles away from the crime scene. A New Jersey state trooper, patrolling the turnpike near Exit 4 in Mount Laurel, spotted the silver-striped Mustang. The Florida license plates were a beacon. The trooper didn't immediately activate his lights. He trailed her for several miles, calling for backup and confirming the vehicle's description. He observed her through her side mirror. She was watching him back, her eyes meeting his through the glass. Yet she didn't accelerate. She didn't try to outrun the law. When the reinforcements arrived, the trooper activated his sirens. Omelly pulled over near Cherry Hill. The traffic stop was high risk. Officers knew she was armed, and they knew she was a murder suspect. With guns drawn, they ordered her out of the vehicle. She surrendered without a struggle. She was taken to the state police barracks in Moorestown, a nomadic party girl whose journey had ended in a cold interrogation room. But the most damning evidence was waiting in the trunk. When investigators popped the lid of the Mustang, they found exactly what Tony Miranda had warned the Jacksonville police about: 5 handguns. One of them, a 9mm, would later be identified as the weapon that ended Omelly's life. The firearms sat there, a silent indictment of the systemic failures that had allowed them to cross state lines. Back in Little Ferry, the news was beginning to break. The nursing student slain headlines hit the local papers before the sun had even fully set. Friends from William Patterson University, still carrying their textbooks, gathered near the police tape in disbelief. They spoke of Omelly's 3.9 GPA, her dedication to her sorority, and her dreams of working in a neonatal unit. They couldn't reconcile the woman they knew, the girl who meticulously planned her life, with the violent end she had met on a Tuesday afternoon. The manhunt was over, but for the Dominguez family, the nightmare was only beginning. Their mother, Juana, returned home to find her youngest son in the care of relatives and her daughter's body being removed by the medical examiner. In a single day, her family had been halved. One daughter was dead, and the other was a killer. As Omelly was being processed at the Little Ferry Police Headquarters, the reality of her situation began to collide with her mental state. She was facing first-degree murder, but the legal system was now forced to confront a troubling reality. She was 5 months pregnant, carrying a child that would likely be born behind bars, and her speech remained disorganized and incoherent. As she was led into the Bergen County Jail, the question wasn't just what she had done, but why, and whether she was even capable of understanding the gravity of the life she had just extinguished. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button. The legal aftermath of the shooting on Sandhill Court has not been a swift march toward justice. Instead, it has been a grueling marathon of continuances, psychiatric evaluations, and bureaucratic finger-pointing. As the case of the state of New Jersey versus Omelly Dominguez moved from the headlines into the sterile environment of the Bergen County Superior Court, the focus shifted from the what to the why, and more importantly, the could it have been stopped? Omelly Dominguez faced a mountain of charges: first-degree murder, possession of a firearm for an unlawful purpose, and hindering her own apprehension. Under New Jersey law, a conviction for first-degree murder carries a staggering sentence, potentially 30 years to life in prison. But for the defense, the case was never about denying that the trigger was pulled. The evidence, the ring camera footage, the younger brother's witness testimony, and the murder weapon found in the trunk was insurmountable. Instead, the battleground became the state of Omelly's mind. Her defense team leaned heavily into her documented history of paranoid schizophrenia. They argued that the woman who drove 934 miles was not a cold-blooded assassin, but a victim of a catastrophic mental health collapse. They pointed to the fact that she was 5 months pregnant at the time, a condition that reportedly led her to stop taking her antipsychotic medication for fear of harming the fetus. This no-win scenario, choosing between her own mental stability and the health of her unborn child, became the cornerstone of a proposed plea deal. The defense suggested a sentence of just 8 years in exchange for a guilty plea to second-degree manslaughter. The Bergen County Prosecutor's Office, however, stood firm. Backed by the grief of a family that felt Omelly's life was worth more than an 8-year sentence, they rejected the deal. They argued that the act of taking 5 guns, driving across multiple state lines, and demanding money showed a level of premeditation and intent that reached the threshold of murder. But as the trial dates were set, they were repeatedly pushed back. In early 2025, and again as we moved into 2026, the court granted continuances for final disposition conferences. These are the legal system's last chances to resolve a case without a trial, but they often serve as placeholders while medical experts debate a defendant's competency. While the lawyers argued in New Jersey, a second battle for accountability was unfolding in Florida. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, JSO, found itself under a microscope. The public and the Dominguez family demanded to know how an officer could be told a mentally unstable woman had 5 guns and a stolen car, yet dismiss it as a civil matter. The JSO conducted an internal investigation, as did the Bayonne Police Department in New Jersey. The results of these investigations were a bitter pill for the family to swallow. Both departments eventually released statements concluding that their officers had acted within policy and procedure. In the eyes of the law, the officers hadn't broken any rules. However, in a rare moment of institutional humility, they acknowledged that the situations could have been handled with more urgency. For Omelly's mother and brother, these words were hollow. Within policy meant that the system was designed to allow a tragedy like this to happen. The case has since become a focal point for activists demanding red flag law reforms, laws that would allow police to act on the warnings of family members when a mental health crisis involves firearms, regardless of domestic property rights. But beyond the courtroom and the police barracks, there is the matter of the life that was stolen. To ensure that Omelly Dominguez is remembered as more than just a victim in a true crime script, we must look at the vacuum her absence created. At William Patterson University, the nursing program felt the loss of the scholar like a physical weight. Omelly wasn't just another student. She was the one who helped others pass their exams, the one who led her sorority, Mu Sigma Upsilon, with a mix of grace and iron-willed determination. In a move that brought both tears and a small measure of peace to her family, the university awarded Omelly her nursing degree posthumously. It was a recognition of the thousands of hours she had put into her studies, the 3.9 GPA she had maintained, and the professional she was destined to become. Her family accepted the degree on her behalf, a piece of paper that represented a future that should have involved hospital wards and saved lives, but instead ended in a quiet cemetery. Omelly's legacy is now carried by her younger brother, the same boy who had to find the courage to face his sister's killer and call for help. The family has spoken out about the need for better mental health resources and the removal of the stigma surrounding schizophrenia. They don't want Omelly's death to be in vain. They want it to be the catalyst for a world where civil matters don't include 5 guns in a trunk and where a mother doesn't have to choose between 2 daughters in such a horrific way. As we look at the facts of March 22, 2022, we are left with a haunting portrait of the fragility of the American life. We see a young woman, Omelly, who did everything right. She studied, she worked, she planned, and we see a system that did almost everything wrong. We see a sister, Angeli, who fell through every crack in the medical and legal floorboards until there was nowhere left to fall but into violence. As of today, Omelly Dominguez remains in custody. The child she was carrying at the time of the shooting has been born, a child who will grow up knowing this story only through the fragmented memories of a broken family. The legal proceedings continue to drag on, with the next court dates looming as another opportunity for a resolution that may never truly feel like justice. Because in a case where the victim is a promising healer and the perpetrator is her own flesh and blood, there is no verdict that can repair the damage. Omelly Dominguez's story is a reminder that the empathy we show to those struggling with mental health and the urgency with which we respond to cries for help can be the difference between a graduation ceremony and a funeral. She was a scholar, a sister, and a protector, and while her voice was silenced on Sand Hill Court, the lessons of her life and the preventable nature of her death continue to resonate. As we end this story, we look back at that 3.9 GPA, that immaculate room, and that meticulous planner. Omelly had a plan for the world. The world, unfortunately, did not have a plan to save her. And as always, you've been watching True Crime Story Vault, where every story is told with facts, empathy, and respect for those who can no longer speak for themselves. For more true crime stories like this, hit the subscribe button and comment your thoughts below. Until next time, remember, the truth is never buried.